Should be flooding subsequently destruction.
It's a storm surge.
Yeah, flooding
Flooding. And
and potentially destruction.
Destruction, can we be more specific?
Yeah, I mean, that being actually washed.
Damage
washed
to
out.
structures,
The road.
Road.
Washes away. I mean,
Pavement washes away.
do we say erosion of the road structure? Wash up, yeah, damage to road. We'll say.
Yeah, that's it. By the way, would bicycling fall under asset?
Sure.
Okay, sorry.
That's recreation too, though, right?
To me, I saw it as recreation. Yeah. Great road for biking.
Okay, I'll just kind of cycling and recreation. The scooters that you all love too, right? Okay, so the road is being damaged. Is that the only thing that's being damaged?
utilities, I guess, would be.
On the beach side, we do go to dark storms.
Beach erosion?
And do erosion.
So I see we have causes, but now we're writing results.
Yeah, I
mean, this is,
think here what the guidance says is what is happening to the assets. The causes is not necessarily the whole picture. I think causes and impacts, I would say impacts, yeah. We need to know what the results are if we're gonna write a problem statement, right? So these things are happening. Any other?
Habitat loss.
Okay.
Marsh on the other side, the beach as well.
Okay.
Yeah, they'll make a whole dam from beach to back to marsh. In a river. And what about the telephone poles, if you impact, you have your liners. They're above ground.
Has there been damage to utilities? Or is that just like a projected?
The
impact?
hurricane of 50 something,
Yeah.
something, right? They all.
The damage is wind related. Okay, so that's another kind of cause we can include. I'm just gonna add that in there, okay. Okay, so then we've got consequences, which is, we can't, yeah, oh yeah, sure.
Heavy use, right, by people, like walking to do, I mean, the town has to address that with walk over, you know.
Yes.
concerns, but I don't know how much the percent impacted by visitors, but I'm sure that.
So like, would you include foot and vehicle traffic as like impacts there, or is it mostly foot traffic?
Well, what do you guys think? I mean, people, bicycle, I don't know.
I would include-
People walk.
I would include cars just because that's the whole reason that Scotch Beach is open the way that it is so that there's vehicle access there.
What was that?
Just the whole reason that Scotch Beach, that entrance is so wide is for vehicle access, so I do think that has an impact, you know, having that be so wide has a huge impact on the road and all of that.
So that would be.
Well, it's dirt lot.
I think the parking lot was damaged to the area.
The parking lot,
Interesting perspective, right?
the parking lot is part of the
It
problem.
wasn't oversized. The parking lot.
So it sounds like there's like recreational use pressure on this site that's
Yeah.
maybe causing
That's for
some
sure.
impacts.
Competing, yeah, well, say like the bicycle lane that it's always covered in sand, right?
Yeah.
So, that's like
Okay,
conflict.
So the next step is to kind of think about these impacts and causes and think about like, but why do we care that this stuff is happening? What is it doing to the community? So what does it mean that there's damage to the road? What does it mean that we have this heavy recreational use? What's the impact to the community? This is a little bit more
So
like-
you're saying, so you're going in the direction of, for example, tourism is affected by this, right? Limits tourism to a degree. It also limits community. If we lose structures, such as homes, we lose communities. Meaning those people have to either rebuild or move or leave. That's
So displacement potentially of people?
The loss of taxes, whether it's tourist taxes or property taxes, because some of these properties will become unworkable. I can't think of a better word, or undevelopable, whereas once they were, so you have a loss of property value.
Okay.
Yeah, some of this, I think all of that is negative. But certainly a consequence is the monetary cost to the town to repair the road.
State
You
road.
can't live without that road. Oh, okay, all right. Then the state should be very anxious to keep it.
Cost of
But
repair.
certainly the health and well-being of the people who live north of that area who may not be able to leave in an emergency.
So safety, public safety is threatened by these things.
Probably number one.
That's always, I mean, you know, I feel like when we have these conversations, oftentimes this is the common ground, right? Everybody's concerned with public safety. Nigel.
If you've lost a single road connection to an inhabited part of the island, I would have thought, you know, everything else is sort of obvious. I mean, in
Right.
terms of all, you know, I mean, is it worth spending lots of time on thinking about all these little things here and there? I mean, it's.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It's really the central idea here is this is the conduit between the north and south parts of the island, correct? I think the value of doing something like this is that you're interested in building this problem statement and getting people to support whatever you're going to suggest as a project, right? And so people are going to care about different things. Some people might see the parking areas as, you know, damage to the habitat. Some people might think there needs to be more parking. You know, some people might be extremely worried about the tax base, and others habitat might be their primary concern. So I think that's the reason we do this.
Is it also useful for grant application?
Well, yes, that's a great point. We're always thinking about how can we get money. So here I see various ways you could kind of, I don't want to say spin, frame the problem.
Yes.
So there are all kinds of, and you know, with the infrastructure bill, all kinds of funding sources related to public safety, public access, recreation, habitat. And so you could pull on any one of these and make those the focus of a funding application. Maybe it means, you know, you've got multiple sources funding different aspects of a project. But I think it's a worthy exercise just to kind of get these things down on paper. But yes, I think it all comes back to this idea that this is the one access point here to this area. And so there's huge implications if that gets damaged or removed. Any other consequences we want to include in here?
Does anyone know, are there any historical sites, archaeological,
Oh.
other that might be damaged at the same time? I was thinking grant money, you
Yeah,
know.
there should be quite a few.
What do you think?
It might be too long.
Yeah,
I mean, I think isn't the whole of Great Salt Pond in the archaeological district, so. it certainly is, yeah.
You could put a question mark there, but I think it's a good question.
Yeah, it is. Damage to like cultural thing. I would argue that, you know, Sullivan House, like, that's kind of a cultural site, you know, it's a.
And I would argue that that's high enough, that that's not gonna be impacted, but the lower houses, you know, that are at 2 feet, you know, as opposed to.
Oh,
15 or 20 or something, and the other places they have. In both directions, and high ground, not on the sandbar that is approved.
So if you look at the last item on this problem statement worksheet, it gives you kind of a formula for making your problem statement. So it's basically, it's kind of a Mad Lib here. The asset at the location is blank, right? Which is consequences. So it's, so you could basically fill that in with any one thing from these lists. I think we could probably have multiple problem statements, Nigel.
Can you just go back? So, if I understand it, the sheet correctly, causes and consequences are really separated. But in fact, impacts are really consequences. They're not causes.
Yeah.
I think we need to be taking most of those things from the top half and putting them in the bottom half. Right? I mean, the cause is storm surge and flooding and maybe high wind. The consequences are damage to the road, dune erosion, all of that stuff.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so I'm gonna star the ones that we feel might be more in the consequence.
I think you could draw a line under flooding and maybe just move the wind exposure to the top.
And the heavy recreational use, I would say. Right?
Well, I thought we were supposed really to be considering sea level rise. I mean, aren't we? I mean, is this?
Well, I would say that the heavy recreational use exacerbates the effects of sea level rise.
Okay, sure.
We can certainly have things that are interacting as stressors. So this I would think, you could list as kind of a secondary cause. Okay, that's a great point, Nigel. So these causes are causing these impacts, and then all of these impacts, right? Okay, great. So I don't want to get too hung up on a single problem statement, because I think all of what you've mentioned is important, but maybe a good way to kind of fill out this Mad Lib for now and start on like a centralized problem statement would be to like kind of prioritize, like which do we think are the most important impacts that we're seeing at this site. I think we know that the causes are pretty well defined, but of these items, which would be the ones that you would, I mean, we can list them all, but are there ones that you would say?
You could group those into categories such as
Okay.
safety.
Yep. Okay.
A bunch of those fall under safety, a bunch of those fall under costs, whether it's loss of taxes or paying for damages.
Okay.
It's high costs, right?
Yep.
Loss of community and habitat. That's both for people and our plants. So you could group them.
Okay. I think that's a great idea.
And then just to what you were saying before about like if you're applying for a grant, we probably wouldn't write a different problem statement for.
Right, you could pull on any of this information. So let's, maybe I'll do, first we could, I'll put an S next to the ones that are public safety. So, let's see. Did we say emergency access?
Cost of repair, yeah, well,
That's number one.
Yes.
safety is number one,
Well, damage to the road and things
right?
that come from that would be clearly number one concern. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I almost feel like we could say our statement is that, you know, that damage to the road at, sorry, I'm trying to do the math.
Yep.
Do this, but, Corneck Road, damage to Corneck Road, it prevents emergency access for.
Almost
Do you get what I'm trying to
everything.
say? Like, you know, basically that is our problem statement, because that encompasses
Okay.
everything else, kind of what you were saying.
Right, so you
Nothing
could
else really
say,
matters if you can't even
Yeah.
use that anymore.
so storm surge and flooding at Corneck Road North causes damage to the road,
Flooding could cause
closing, yeah,
closing, rain damage.
which is threatening public safety and emergency access.
That's just results,
Right.
in loss of public safety, loss of community, loss of income.
Impacts to
Economic
tourism.
extreme, yes.
And habitat loss and beach reduce.
Losses.
Okay. All right, so should we take a stab at writing this out as a statement? It's okay if it's long, it's fine. Again, this is something that we can refine as we think about who we're gonna ask to fund these, whatever solutions we.
Do you want me to write it so everyone can keep looking at these things? Or,
Yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah. I mean, would it help to see it just written out so we can?
yes,
So the one thing I would say is that the consequences vary with the severity.
Yes.
Okay, so there is nuisance flooding, which is the first thing. And then there's actually underwater for, days. Road being torn out, yeah, I mean, all of these are gonna have very different sort of impacts.
Right, and should the problem statement be
So I think,
today or future, right? I mean, there's.
well, I think as sea level rises, these are the impact's gonna be worse. But one could start out saying that nuisance flooding has these effects. Consistent flooding has these effects. And so
Let me see if I can get some masking tape.
These are sticky, actually. Why don't I? Actually, that's a great idea.
Well, and to your point, actually, you storm pool. Those types of issues too. You can frame that timeframe.
According to Dr. Oppenheimer, the next school control. For the next category 3 hurricane. That was his priority. And I think we would be doing that by tackling Cornet.
Okay, so if we're gonna try to write a problem statement, I think it's fine if we just, there's obviously a lot of assets there, but if we just say Corneck Road is the asset, right, that this is revolving around and is the asset of concern, that can kind of encompass everything that's there, and then just clarify that it's the north section.
North of Beach Avenue. Till.
We said, break.
yeah, I think we all know, Corneck Road.
Okay. And is flooded by storm surge, is that the cause that we wanna?
Right now, it's because of storm
Sure.
But as sea level rise increases, that will be compounded. Right. Would that fall under problem statement? On your list?
Yeah, I think it's worth having it in there somewhere, like even if it's at the end, these problems are only going to get worse with sea level rise, could be part of that problem statement. Unless you, okay,
You say, instead of saying flooded, not necessarily, you say it's extremely vulnerable to impacts from storm surge and sea level rise or flooded. Because it isn't flooded right now, like, we need to.
well, I think that's the issue, right? I mean, we kind of took, let's see. We kind of identified these things as the cause, and then everything else like is kind of an impact, like it is, there's erosion that's happened right now, there are weak points right now. The cause is the flooding, right?
Is vulnerable to storm surge and flooding.
Okay.
Is,
Vulnerable to storm surge. And
That's it. In the short term, and sea level rise in the long term.
Alright, how does it all apply then?
vulnerable to flooding.
compounded by increasing sea level rise.
This is a process, it takes a while to get it right, okay. Corneck Road, north of Beach Ave, is vulnerable to flooding. How do we want to incorporate storm surge and sea level rise in there? Right now is,
I mean, certainly storm surge in the short term and sea level rise in the longer term would cover it, I think.
does that sound,
Anything that impacted by storm surge and increases
What if we
sea
just say it's vulnerable to the effects of coastal storms and sea level rise? Because I do feel like we're, flooding is important, storm surge is important, wind is important, and that's all kind of coastal storms.
Yeah. And flooding doesn't sound so serious, it's just a little bit of water on the road.
Okay.
I think we're vulnerable to destruction caused by storm surge. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, yeah, like permanent inundation, is that like?
Yes, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, so that,
permanent flooding would be major consequence, whether it was damaged or not, it's underwater.
Right. Corneck Road, north of Beach Ave, is vulnerable to coastal storms and sea level rise. So shorter term, which will continue into the future, but eventually it's not just going to be storm surges and coastal storms, it will be a more regular occurrence once.
I like Socha's addition of is vulnerable to destruction by coastal storms and sea level rise.
Okay. Destruction?
Does that make, because I thought that,
Well, exactly, I mean, flooding is the first thing that's going to cause a problem. And flooding is enough to close the road. So, I mean, the trouble with focusing on the most extreme is that people tend to say, oh, well, that's not going to happen for, 30 years.
Okay,
I mean,
flooding and destruction.
Well, I would say.
That's an adjective, you're talking about adjectives too, now, right now.
That's
And
the
then you could
cause.
name the results.
And then,
anything
yes.
From nuisance flooding to destruction.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, maybe a good approach would be to list that under the consequences. So consequences are, which is causing, I mean, we could say which is.
Resulting in. Resulting in flooding. Destruction.
damage to roadbed and flooding. That,
Erosion, what else did I hear?
Damage to roadway.
Do we want to say road closures and damage? I mean, because is the closure itself also a problem that,
Yes.
even though it might not necessarily result in,
Access, disconnection.
This means that, what's the word? Facetious, not facetious, but exhausting or whatever it is, I think the wording is so important for us for applying for grants, communicating with the public, communicating in general. I feel it.
I completely agree. I had a teacher in high school and who was like, it was like a critical writing class. She always used to say, how do I know what I think until I see what I say? So I think it's helpful even internally to kind of work this out to make sure you're all on the same page. And so, and not to say that we won't have differing opinions about some of this stuff, but I think it will just benefit you to have a unified message when you take this stuff public. And we can kind of try to do that through language here. I totally agree. Let's see, so we've got so far, Cornet Road, north of Beach Ave is vulnerable to coastal storms and sea level rise, comma, which results, thank you, in flooding, erosion, road closures and damage. What other consequences do we want to include in here?
I don't want to keep it simple.
Yeah.
Make it yes more
What
complicated.
you could do is stop it there and then switch to having impacts, the following impacts.
Okay, yeah, okay. And damage. Okay,
Impacts include. And then list the things we have on our chart.
does somebody want to read them off?
How about beach and dune erosion? Loss of habitat.
Do you want to prioritize those in order at all?
Yeah, dune erosion is not a consequence of the Cornet Road north of, it's a result of the storm surge and whatever, but it's not itself. The first sentence, are we not? I mean, you're talking about an impact of the sentence we've just written. The sentence we've just written is to without damage. So I don't think that we should be including beach and dune erosion as part of the impact of that.
Is this kind of implied in here?
I'm sorry?
This is implied in here because we're saying.
No, it isn't. I mean, it's a separate effect, although
Okay.
the dune erosion itself is going to be part of what causes
The
the
road
loss of the
effect.
road.
The failure of the road it's kind of backwards.
How about something like loss of transportation at
Yes.
this point will result in a major public safety consequence? I'm sort of naming. Does that make sense?
Well, we don't have to have beach and dune erosion here if we don't think that that's appropriate. We could focus more on kind of the social and environmental impacts if you want in this second sentence.
You can summarize it, all of which have financial, social, and environmental consequences, and then if you want, you can make list of specifics.
This is the primary impact, again, transportation.
Safety.
Well, transportation.
Cutting off everyone.
Yeah. I almost feel like, sorry to start
Transportation.
us all over again, but I almost feel like saying, the transportation for residents and emergency vehicles on Cornet Road north of Beach Avenue. Just sort of doing it the way that the Mad Lib is set up instead of the way we've done it. So transportation is at Cornet Road is vulnerable to those things. which will result in a major public safety hazard. Is that something along those lines?
So add a little bit to this to explain exactly
Well,
what
I'm
the
just saying,
asset
it
is.
sounds like you guys are saying transportation is kind of the most important part of this that we will be losing, so including that earlier on.
So when problem statement is one sentence, are we trying to achieve one problem statement in one sentence, or can we have several for this?
I think you,
Like repeat this number 3 or 4 times for this.
yeah, if you want to have multiple, I think that's fine. I think it does help to try to kind of focus it as much as you can so that you've got kind of your elevator speech for why you're focusing on this area. But if you feel like there's kind of like 2 major sets of issues, for example, like you could have one for human impacts and one for environmental impacts, if you wanted to. It is, yeah, it's a lot. I mean, I do like the idea of like, you could kind of just list the impacts. I mean, this impacts everything from public safety to the tax base to tourism to, and you know, habitats and fish and wildlife. You could kind of laundry list them that way. But it's up to you if you think it needs, you know, I think
Might be quicker for us before you list the consequences on the paper.
you've got a great list. And you know, and again, you don't have to list all of those every time you mention this project. I think this first sentence basically says it all, right? Core Neck Road north of Beach Ave is vulnerable to coastal storms and sea level rise, which result in flooding, erosion, road closures, and damage. To me, that is extremely strong. I think it's worth capturing what you've listed here, maybe in a second sentence, but you don't have to, you know, that can just be kind of expanding on what this problem statement
I
is.
mean, certainly if in the earlier portions of this, you know, the fact that it is the only connection to the north is sort of emphasized, that everything else sort of follows.
So, yeah, right. Does that make sense? So do you want me to add another statement about impacts?
Within that one sentence, I think what I'm hearing, how people want to say is make sure it's clear that it cuts off access to many private properties and emergency services, and I know that you see and for that, but so making it clear instead of just saying road closures,
Yeah,
making it
okay.
clear there's no way to get around, like you can't just detour, like.
So what if we
It's only
expanded,
access to the north part of the island.
what if we put that in the asset part? Because that's the asset, this is the major connector to the north part, like Claire was suggesting.
You could, I guess, say effectively cutting the north end off.
Access
Yes.
to,
Or put it in commas, Core Neck Road, comma, the only access to.
And it's particularly true geographically when you say north of Beach Ave,
Okay,
because that's it.
Okay.
Say Core Neck Road, north of Beach Avenue, the only access point to the north part of the island. If you have your trucks in the road, you could say approximately 200 homes, whatever, get the number.
did we get that number?
This sounds like what we wrote in the draft.
Yeah.
I wasn't present.
You should have been.
Annual access.
280 residents.
Include significant threats of public safety.
And the community's function.
Utilities. All the other things you have, you know. Smaller, public health, we said it's the most
community,
important
do
thing.
you want to like kind of say community as the like displacement?
Yeah, and in residential, or, yeah, community.
What else do we,
Might be helpful to have, not for all state, but like further in the detail, an actual percentage of, that's 280 residents, but what percentage of the population resides there? Just to get
Yes.
an idea of the
Well,
So-
magnitude of. So that's what I'm saying.
how many residents are in North?
Well, so that figure is for homes, I don't know, the
Right.
population. Yeah.
You're gonna have to stick with the number of homes, like,
Yeah.
as you talk about.
How
How many people are really affected in local time, not really.
Yeah, right.
I don't have it.
Hey, there's only 10 families on there.
So that's important, then the town council.
And there's bird banding too, right?
Not the weather,
Well, yeah.
birds and water. Serving snacks. I didn't hear you.
do we wanna, so I'm just trying to capture in categories,
Yeah, categories of this.
safety, utilities, community, tourism, cultural resources.
Yes.
Historic and resources.
We forgot the transfer station. That's everything. Yeah. I guess that goes under utilities, right?
Yes. Safety, utilities, community, tourism, historic and cultural resources.
Recreational.
I would say public facility, I wouldn't call it transportation.
No, I would,
Public
I think we should.
facility.
I would call it trash disposal. It is the sole line of trash disposal.
Municipal
You know what I
services.
don't like about what Grace is doing, what I don't like about it is the language is getting so general, so soft, you don't feel the impact. Whereas if you say that, lost homes, or the displacement of people, I think that speaks louder. Well, I heard you say lost home and loss of access to our facilities, our cultural places, our recreational,
So instead, how about instead of significant threats, loss of access to?
I think it is a threat to public health.
It is a loss of access to public, see, it's both directions, right?
Yeah.
So it's,
Loss of access to emergency services, maybe?
yeah.
Anyone who knows the island is gonna know what the consequences are. They're major.
Include,
But when you write grants, they don't necessarily know who we are.
to, public. So I mean, like, public services is a broad, it's, you know,
I feel like the threat to public health and safety is one standalone concept. And in addition to that, we're losing access to cultural resources, community access,
okay.
housing, recreational facilities.
So.
Right. I think, Kim, I think you're onto something in that if I were gonna lead with anything, I would lead with threats to public health and safety. Like I said, that is the one thing that everyone cares about, right? So,
How about using the word impact? Health and public safety, impacting community, tourism, like that.
do you wanna say threats to public health and safety?
I think that's fine, yeah.
What is he doing, son?
Public health, Caitlin was suggesting that public health.
Is that, do we wanna leave it there? Is that specific enough for everyone?
I mean,
Well, I see the other details as being next year. I like to kind of take a pool, that's it, and then the other things, so you mentioned, they're there, but they're next year.
Like.
What if- okay,
percent of the-
Can I suggest a different structure here? What if we said Hornick Road, north of Beach Ave, the only access to the northern part of Block Island is vulnerable to coastal storms and sea level rise, which result in flooding, erosion, road closures, and damage which threaten public health and safety. Additional impacts include, and then we can list the rest. Okay. And then your problem statement is concise and it focuses on that number one priority of public health and safety, and we can add the rest that you've got listed here. Does that make sense? Well, it's things like you want people thinking of all these things. This is not just a single faceted problem. This is affecting everything about the community.
I think that two-tier are the thing that is most critical.
Okay.
Somebody is houses on fire or they're.
Yeah.
In addition, maybe I lost my house, I can't get to the transfer station, I can't go to my hike at Clayhead, I can't go to Fort White, and I can't go fanning birds, I can't go swimming at my favorite beach, I can't go play my favorite place. They're all huge impacts to my life. But they're not as friendly as my house is right now, and I'm not.
Yeah, like Allison said, it works both ways. They can't get to you and you can't get out if you need to, right? All right, so I'm just gonna do a clean version here.
Be right back.
Is this how you would all work this, the northern part of Block Island, or would you say something else? The north end? What is like the common parlance?
Yeah, whatever. I'm saying that. But.
Is that okay, or,
I would have put part of Block Island,
okay,
but I would do the north end of Block Island.
the north end of Block
Yeah,
Island?
north end.
Okay.
It's important that, you know, when we get into the point that it's put in some quantified that they work for number of houses.
Yeah.
Because Northern end, somebody might think, oh, that's just a
Yeah.
It doesn't give it, I mean, it's.
You could
About
have
northern,
A third of the island.
northern portion, northern third.
Or northern, yeah.
What's the
half.
square mean?
That way too.
From just a linear standpoint, not an area standpoint, it could almost be half the island, right?
Yeah, I think that's the scene. I would say it's a third one.
Yeah.
Usually back right now, like a very solid third.
Is a northern third, so that the northern third of the island.
Make me cross more stuff out? The northern third?
No.
Northern third.
Yeah, the north end of the island, you just put 1/3.
Okay, everything, so.
I think that. I think that that's pizza.
Just needs to.
No. Right.
That threaten, is what we said? So. And safety. Ooh, this marker, all right, ooh.
No.
Jeez. Sorry, this is like a lot of food today. Okay, and then what? Impacts include, how do we want to work the next piece? Other, further? Or do we want to make it like active voice, like it also? Yeah. maybe-
That's enough.
Exactly. As if that weren't enough.
Something completely disastrous.
Yes. Okay. I think I got it, okay.
QR code. Townhouse per se.
What do you think? So what do we want to say? Additional impacts include,
We could don't write it down, we could just say loss of, and then list all the things that we lose.
okay,
Yeah, this is a team like
The loss of access to
access,
these
loss,
things.
loss of, and then list all the losses. Such as. You're losing access to these things.
so certainly loss of access to tourism, recreation, and cultural sites of cultural significance.
Loss of municipal facility.
Yeah, loss of access to. Municipal facilities, recreational areas.
Cultural, recreation. And then there's the financial impact. Loss of money. Because properties will start to lose their value, we have loss of tax. Things like income.
Yeah, they're all around.
They'll become exclusive.
Yeah, but in general, they lose value. It's already happening elsewhere.
About using the term, instead of loss of access. Is connecting residents from all these things or isolating, like using a term like that.
Yeah, we could say, yeah, like loss of access to municipal facilities, recreational areas, historical and cultural resources, disconnection of communities, or
Property
something,
value fluctuations.
impacts to property values. Loss of, I mean, obviously loss would be the.
I like that, just,
Lots of property values.
yeah. I just think that's a great way to say it.
Horrifying.
Yeah.
Is that too
You're
general?
disconnecting the community or disconnecting.
If the community on the loss, it's loss.
Yeah, I almost think like the loss of access is what results in the disconnection, right? Disconnection of the Block Island community. Because we probably want to add the tourism and tax revenue, right?
Loss of income, and there's a monetary cost for repairs and all that, so there's a financial loss.
Right, Additional impacts include loss of access to municipal facilities, recreational areas, historical and cultural resources, disconnection of the Block Island community, and financial impacts from loss of tax
Are we trying
revenue.
to be sort of encyclopedic here, or are we trying to keep it sort of
In
brief
this-
and snappy?
Well, I think the brief
I'm
and
really
snappy.
afraid that we're going to start actually eroding the value of the first sentence.
So I think the brief and snappy is this, and that is the elevator speech for this project. I'm just trying to capture this here, and we can, I mean, you guys could wordsmith this at your leisure. If you.
Good to have for us at this point to have a list of all the losses, whether or not they're, I mean, I don't feel as strong about the loss of taxes, but I do feel strongly about the loss of revenue that we're gonna now have to expend repairing those areas. Or some reason. Revenue encompasses the loss.
How about, so the loss of
I think we have another sentence coming, honestly, because I think this should say additional impacts, blah, 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 and the disconnection of Block Island community. The cost to the town or the state, whatever, to.
What costs associated with this change? Is all the loss of revenue and expenditure.
There we go. Yeah.
Okay, so the.
Matter change.
Loss of revenue
And
and expenditure.
expenditures, yep. That was definitely.
I can't remember the.
Something like this loss will result in.
Increase.
Oh,
Additional impacts include. Is that right?
we're putting a period in and we're starting this.
Yeah, I know.
Oh,
We
sorry.
could, I mean, we could keep going, we could say.
Repair.
Financial impacts include loss of revenue and repair expenses or remediation expenses.
And these remediation expenses can be expected to exceed the town's ability to pay. It's not something Block Island can afford to fix by itself.
So is it loss of revenue related to tourism and property taxes and then expenditures for repair?
And. But you're right, I mean, I don't think. I mean, I was a state road and I was a state.
Well, I hope not, well, we couldn't do it anyway. But then the argument has to be really focused on the state and if the state gets federal money, which it does, focusing on things that will encourage that, the state. Tends to pay the state and the state gets money from that to do the work. Whatever those key words are.
Not to us, to pass on their financial.
Financial impacts include loss of revenue related to tourism and property taxes and the expense of repairs. Should I say road repairs?
Instead of repair, or it might be more broad than road repairs, because we like the.
The expensive infrastructure repairs.
The buildings will be.
Redevelopment.
If you need just to
Reconnect.
What buildings is it?
homes, people have to.
This is the loss of Cornet Road, that's not all the damage.
When it floods, it will. It might get.
Maybe one or two, you mean right off the road in that short section.
So what about residential and
Insurance.
infrastructure repairs?
That would be insurance. I don't know. Insurance.
See,
So I just said the expense of infrastructure repairs, but we could include residential and infrastructure
Here,
repairs.
but not like a, not, I guess, the conversation, but it's minimal.
Okay.
Private,
Yeah.
Not worth mentioning here.
no, and so then, but then also make the property taxes. But I think the financial impact is more to having to repair.
Yeah.
Public asset, and
Okay.
then what is the connection? Like you talk about in here, is it a new road? or-
Right, okay.
What is another?
Yes.
That's,
Well, I think this is, but remember though, this is the problem statement. So this is like, what's the financial problem you have now? And the financial problem seems more to be that like, you will be doomed to repeatedly pay for repairs if you don't solve this problem, right? So do we want to take out the revenue piece and then just say repeated repair of infrastructure, or
I think that's one problem right now.
do we
Want to talk about?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the tourism part of it, I think, we'll lose tourism dollars.
If there's a permanent innovation, or just kind of like.
Yeah. if this road goes away, will it impact tourism and the revenue that brings?
Yeah, people will not come here and go to the town beach. I mean, we're talking about the town beach facility, I don't think it's that yet. I mean, we have lots of recreation, people come here for recreation, all sorts.
Right.
North End renters.
And most of, exactly, and I was just saying, most of the homes up there are rented for tourism dollars.
Is it worth, so if we can probably,
But I would give her property tax, it's $30 and the expense of.
repeated infrastructure?
Yes. Well, that's a good word, repeated, because that's really the issue.
You guys are, this is great. I think you've done a solid job here. Do you want me to read the whole thing? Do you ever want to hear this again? I want you all to to recite this. Right. Yeah,
I don't know
well,
how you do it, Katie, that's what-
I am inspired by you all. So we're actually doing not too bad on time. We're at 2:15. We're kind of supposed to be on the next step, but I think this was worth the time investment. Let's make sure that, let's take a picture of this.
No, I'm writing it down right now. Oh, that's what I was thinking, picture of every day.
Yeah. I can leave this with you, Allison.
An interesting sort of learning from this is that a monthly 1-hour meeting could never achieve this. I mean, how many monthly 1-hour meetings would we have to deal with just 6 issues?
Yeah,
You know, I mean, it's sort of impractical.
well.
I'm not saying this is impractical, I'm saying it's.
So that might be, that might be a kayak rack thing, if you feel like having gone through this process that you're gonna need to meet more often, maybe that's something we should capture. Hopefully, once you've got the hang of it, your brains might be able to work.
I think we need you here.
Well, and that's another thing that we, we've talked about with Judy and Sven, is that Jen and I can certainly come back and help to this. It is, like, I think it does help to have somebody who's trained in facilitation. Do
Yeah.
I'm gonna try that. Whatever.
you want to? Okay, so, I'm just gonna put meeting frequency.
So I mean, the one thing we haven't talked about at all, and maybe that's not the purpose here, but we haven't talked at all about solutions, and is this not supposed to be leading us towards thinking about
Yes.
solutions?
So yes, in theory. So we have a few options. We can either try to go through this process for another problem or another big idea. We could move on to Cornet Road South if you think that's the best use of your and my time today. Or we could kind of move this project forward through the thinking process and look at this kind of implementation framework to think about what do we know, what are the next steps?
I think that's.
Yeah.
Okay.
We now learn how to do this, so we
You learn how to do this.
Correct ourselves.
And the consequence will be the same.
Yeah, very close, right?
right.
Very similar.
So maybe getting through,
Yes, no, maybe not actually.
I think, so obviously you will need to spend some more time coming up with your other problem statements, but do you all kind of appreciate why it's a valuable process? And can you envision how this might help you in the future? I mean, I think this is such a solid statement to go forward with, to present to folks. So having written this, you could fill this out on your statement of need on your worksheet, your 2-page worksheet here. You can, and I would say you can kind of put the short and sweet version for our purposes today.
Judy's also writing down
Oh,
We don't have
Is this going to be turned into a final document that we all get copies of? Do you know? Alison, do you know?
we can,
I think what we'll do is I'll take photos of all the worksheets here, so that will be circulated to everyone. Judy is taking notes, and it certainly will be, the problem statement will certainly be typed up and distributed.
is this whole thing being recorded, Allison, or?
Well, it's on YouTube, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
I guess I'm just really asking, do we need to
You don't
actually
have
write,
to.
everyone write it down?
No, we
Yeah,
can do one version, that's fine.
So what's the next step?
So the next step, just a little disclaimer here, I made this form and I didn't do a very good job because the numbers are all wonky, but so one of the things we want your feedback on today is, does this form capture everything we need to kind of write down to put a plan in place for taking action? So if we want to just kind of run through it, we've got the who. So whose project is this? Who, and when we do that, we kind of like to, there are different frameworks we can use. So there's this thing called the RACI or RACI framework, which is, you break out the people involved in a project by who's responsible, who's accountable, who should be consulted, and who should be informed. So those are very different things, right? So ideally, you want to narrow down like who is really responsible and the point person for moving this project forward. And then accountable, it's like whose job is it to carry out this project? Even though it might be the responsibility of the state, who's going to be the responsible party for putting it in front of the state and DOT and
So I mean, this is, that's why it's not really a project, right? This is an issue.
yes,
It's, there may be many projects
right,
that are involved in dealing with this issue. And then each one of those is going to have potentially, I would have thought, a different person who's going to be comfortable with that specific, project remediation,
Right.
whatever idea.
so that's kind of the next step we're going to try to figure out is this 5 projects, is it 1 project? What is it that needs to be done to address this, right? To do that, so the who is kind of like, that can be differentiated at different points. So we might start off with somebody whose job it is on this committee to focus on Cornet Road North. But then it might, once you come to, a more concrete project, that responsibility might shift to somebody else because that person's not necessarily going to implement the solution.
Yeah. Excuse me.
Mhm.
When the project, we're an advisory committee, so we will advise the town as to which project they should take on. And they will be choosing the people or appointing the people who are in charge of carrying it out, not us, not this group.
Okay, so maybe we don't necessarily need to focus so much on number 2 for now. But I would say number 3, it would be good to think about. So potential collaborators. So that's when you think about, like, you look at all your impacts, and again, this is why it's good to list these out. Then if these are all impacts, who might you be able to recruit to your kind of project team or stakeholder group that might be supportive of what you're trying to do?
Would that be the list of guest speakers we have come to our meetings? They have educated us
It could be. I would say it's more who has a stake in completing this project here. So are there, you know, community groups, neighborhood associations on the north end? Are there, you know, the town is obviously a stakeholder. Are there other, you know, user groups? The Nature Conservancy. Yeah, I mean, I would say they would be an important group to bring to the table.
No, I'm kind of wondering why nature services myself. I mean, I'm not sure I understood that whole flow, because I was thinking could a project would be nature service and, you know, can help facilitate the but the letters aren't gonna be available, but that doesn't seem like it is.
Right. I would say you would list them as a collaborator if you think they have a stake in what might happen, or if they might have a strong opinion about,
To be informed.
or if they, you know, if they're an entity on the island that really should be informed of what's going on.
And I'm just talking in general, honestly.
Right.
I mean, we are some of the small communities.
Right.
And, you know, everyone on the island is a stakeholder.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think more important would be the people who run the transfer station. The road
Cut
is
off.
inaccessible, good point.
Yeah, that's a good
How
one.
do, you know, roads are amazing. And that's a lot.
So are there collaborators, people who are gonna help with the solution? Are they people who are gonna push for solutions, whatever they may be?
Well, I think that can be up to you. So I think it's important when you're thinking about collaborators or stakeholders to bring in, you have to be very clear about what their role is going to be. So are you just going to tell them what you're going to do, or do you want their input in coming up with the solution? And it's very important to communicate that, because if you have a public meeting and people come thinking they're going to influence the outcome, and it's really just you telling them what's happening, there, you know, that could be cause for tension. So
I think that's a critical point, because I wasn't probably thinking that way. But when I think about who can help think the problem through, yeah, I think the nature is yeah. But who's gonna be directly affected, but maybe can't help think the problem through, or maybe can, or doesn't have resources or other expertise, that would be the transfer station.
Right, yes, so there's really,
It does matter how we're initiating.
so there's a huge difference between collaborators and stakeholders. So I don't think we should be lumping them into
Okay.
the same group.
So what would be helpful for me is understanding, yeah, like what is the project that we're working on right now? Are we working on figuring out what the various projects could be? Are we deciding? That's kind of where I think we should be, we've identified a problem. Now we need to kind of figure out what the various solutions are. So we're looking for collaborators to help us with developing those solutions, am I understanding?
well, that's for you all to decide where you're at in this process. So the next page, we've got a section, and again, so I'm gonna change this box. I'm gonna give you guys a revised framework, and I'm gonna break this up into stakeholders and collaborators. Meaning that stakeholders are just that, people who have a stake in the results, who are gonna be affected. And there may be some overlap there, but collaborators are really gonna be people you're looking for input from. So those are more, you know, consulted versus informed.
So professionals.
Could be professionals, but also could be, you know, local experts
Yeah,
or,
they're still professional.
right, or yes, yep. It could be, you know, I'm just thinking like it could be a local historian that's not necessarily their profession, but you want their local knowledge, or, you know, a tribal representative who has, you know. Well, if you're asking for input from them to inform your project, I think they'd be more of a collaborator. But if what you're saying is like the company that runs the transfer station isn't gonna have the capacity to help you figure this out, but they're certainly gonna be impacted by it, then they would be a stakeholder, not a.
Whereas you're right, I mean, historic preservation group, because of the overlay that is not based on, they're gonna be considered. Somebody's gonna need that, may not like their overlay, and have it, because you have to do archaeological.
Because then, yeah, right, if what you're doing has an impact on their situation, sure.
So I think a good practice for this is to cast the net wide. You can always kind of narrow it down and refine it, and again, like kind of parse out what each group's role would be. And it's helpful to know that this is an advisory committee. So that's a very important point to make, is that your job is to produce recommendations. It's not to carry out the action itself.
What I'm hearing you say is everybody's initially a stakeholder, but can also become a collaborator.
Correct. Yeah. I think at some point you think about too many cooks. There's some things that, and I've got more handouts about that. So we've got this handout on the collaborative process. So this is very suited to some problems. Some problems it's not. So for instance, when to use a collaborative process, and that would be bringing in a wide group of stakeholders to kind of group think on some of this. Issues are complex. Many parties are affected. There's a great deal to be lost or gained by some stakeholder groups. No single agency has clear or complete jurisdiction. I think that's key because, like you said, it may be the state, it may be the town on some of the project aspects. No single agency has the resources and expertise to develop and implement a solution. No clear solution is evident. So do you need folks to help develop the solution itself? If the issues are negotiable, which, I mean, you could argue that access to the north end probably isn't negotiable, but, and then, are people willing to take part? When not to use a collaborative process, if the level of concern over the issue is not that great, the basic values or principles are the focus of the problem. If there's extreme polarization that prohibits face-to-face discussion, could we make that argument? I don't know. Sufficient time is not sufficient. If it's literally an emergency situation, you don't really want to take time to convene a committee. This says funding for implementation is not available. I would argue that you don't need to secure funding before you try to come up with a solution. There's money out there, No, please go ahead.
I'd like to finish something, because you got
Yeah.
started, it's collaboration versus stakeholder, and I think the title is not that important, but we can brainstorm a list of the stakeholders that we should be considering. For example, the medical center should be in, we should be talking to them, we should be talking to the seniors committee for their input, to the transfer station for their input. Who is in charge of the beach? The pavilion, the town.
Is there a rec?
The town. The
Somebody
town.
can-
Would it be the rec department? Primarily it would be the town manager. Okay, so if you could make
In
that.
some communities, like. I'm not sure.
What about police and fire?
Right, I would like to have that list of kind of, because each of them may have something to offer and certainly bring up things that we haven't thought of.
And you could
I'm thinking more
probably,
like state, like partners, so state agencies, federal agencies, so.
Yep.
DOT, obviously, partner.
We will always, almost everything is going to be CRMC regulated anyway, so
Right.
we're going to have to use a collaborative process, no question.
Right.
yeah, and Allison, I don't know, like you could go back to your team for the municipal resilience workshop. You probably have more, that was a very diverse set of stakeholders and probably.
I mean, the Army Corps is another one.
Who?
The Army Corps of
Army
Engineers.
Corps, yes, definitely. How about our Air Force? They play a different role if people need to be rescued from the north end, if they provide helicopters or, that was in our coordination.
If it's a non-medical, if it's a non-medical rescue, would Coast Guard play a role if the North End was cut off?
What would be necessary with another?
Evacuation.
I mean, if people
For
are,
what reason?
if they're cut off, they can't get to anything, ferries, whatever, how are they legally?
Dropping some wood.
Yeah. We could toss food packages over the gap.
I mean, like, if it was cut off tomorrow because we had a big storm, yeah, it'd probably be Coast Guard that would go in and like rescue people if they were gonna be cut off for days and days. And
Yeah, fire and rescue, we didn't put that down.
Yes.
Yeah,
We did?
police and fire.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I think
I
this is,
think the level of participation varies. depending on
Yeah,
who you are.
absolutely. yeah,
Yeah.
it's good to think about it though. I mean, it is, because some partners, it's advantageous to engage them early on rather than coming to them with a fully baked idea, right? So I think this is valuable to have and you can just kind of determine like what their role would be. So we don't have too much else on this framework form except for project description, which I'm kind of hearing is that like, we don't really know what the project is, right?
There are clear projects here, I mean, there's
Right.
no question that, and the dunes would be right at the top of the list.
So can we maybe think about in very general terms what the project would be?
Sure.
Okay. Does anybody want to take a stab at that?
Nature-based solutions.
To do,
Road preservation. Well, some sort of nature-based approach toward resiliency.
How about something like strengthening the natural systems around the road to better provide.
Yes, and we need to deal with the east and the west separately.
Wave attenuation.
so what I'm not hearing is like construct a bridge or a span or elevate the road. Are we?
Well, no, I mean, road elevation is something that I think should be, I mean, it's been put on the agenda, if you will, by the study group from 20, whenever it was, 13 or whatever. So I think that has to be one of the things that is thought about. But,
Yeah, I think we're almost like the solutions George was talking about, this kind of first phase, and then, I mean, eventually, yes, there's gonna need to be
Okay.
a bridge or an elevated road or a ferry or it's going to breach.
Okay. So we're thinking a little bit more near term in this group. Is that accurate?
June
Well, I think we can think about both, but I'm just sort of saying, I think there are two categories, there's sort of what the next.
And frankly, we need
10 years.
all of that, all of the above, probably. But there's probably somewhat of a, I'm speaking for myself now, but I have a bias toward nature-based solutions if it makes sense to do that. I mean, if cost-wise, and if they can solve enough of the problem, potentially long enough. There's no point in doing that, first storm and what you try to protect is gone. But I think we prefer to do that sort of a solution. And we want to look at those things first before jumping to the more hardscape answer.
Okay.
But I think you're gonna have that total.
Okay. Well, that's a general project description, so you could split it into in the near term, explore nature-based solutions that would protect the road.
So back when the transportation study was done, we had gone to the council, and the council at that time had, so they had put out several different alternatives. So the council had voted at that time to select the alternative one, elevate the roadway and which is a portion of it, which happens to be the southern end of it, so.
So which end?
So which is not what we're
Okay.
the area
Oh,
we're
the
talking
southern.
about, so the, section A, which would be the southern end, was what they were looking alternative that they like.
Yeah.
So have the council taken that any further?
So, after that, we received some estimates for design. The next phase would be engineering, so, and then there was an estimate for construction, and those went into the CIP.
But just to the south side?
Yeah.
So it doesn't impact this at all anyway?
Is that the lower in elevation section of the road? Okay. Well, that's helpful. So,
South corner,
okay.
yeah, or next,
So it can make sense to say that for this geographic location, in the near term, you would like to focus on nature-based solutions to protect the road from flooding and erosion? Is that?
Yes.
Yes, I think that's true, but I also wonder about that decision of council made, whether or not that was right-headed, and whether or not they should have really been focusing on this. Because the area in the south is not as vulnerable as this, it doesn't create as big a problem as the north. I'm surprised, I'm surprised at my ignorance, I didn't know it's in the capital budget.
You said it was a grant.
Well, this was grant funded, no, there's no, it had been put, I saw that, has been several years ago.
I don't think so.
Is it, you said it's in the CIP, that doesn't necessarily mean there's funding for it, is that?
No, it hasn't been funded, but like years out, several years ago, the town manager at the time had requested estimates for engineering and construction to put in place years out.
Yeah.
I'll check, I have to refer to it again, yeah, that's what currently, but then there was, we considered some of those things, being the state road, and we did have to think about it, so it's, nothing has really.
My just silly background question, what does CIP stand for?
Improvement program.
Okay.
I'll look at the budget, I have a copy of home, I don't think it's in there, but my understanding is that that is not off the table. It's still part of our toolbox
Right,
and recommendations,
right.
right? We're not throwing it out.
No, I don't think so.
What, we're not throwing what out, all of the alternatives, or?
You know,
Yeah, any or all of them, because we have not had a good discussion with the town council. Period. My impression was it was just handed to them, I found this line.
well, there was a presentation done, again, this is several years ago.
But no follow-up that I'm aware of.
The next step was to try to secure funding for engineering. And the engineering, $300,000, we just do engineering. The actual elevation of that portion of the road was several years ago, $500,000. So that's when, knowing that that's a lot of money for a small local community, the next step is trying to find funding to obtain
So
dollars.
would you like me to go and talk to the town manager and ask for an update?
Well, I can, I
It doesn't impact what we're talking about
Yeah.
here now. I mean, we're talking about the
Yeah.
wall part, which is, in terms of criticality, it's completely different. As Kim was saying, that is our sole connection, the south, you can go around. So we should stick with the south, the north.
I think it's started, COVID obviously happened, or other groups and things like that, but the town has had a couple conversations with different state agencies related to Next Road and funding, and so I think that's something kind
Was,
of ongoing, starting to be discussed more, and we have the next deal horizon.
was the north section here that we're talking about here included in any of those studies? And were there alternatives
I
presented?
think I was trying to find a solution that wasn't $100 million, so.
Right.
trying to find something that
Yeah.
would be more feasible. I think it wasn't that at that time, I was trying to
I
come
have
up
a
with
state, I have a brief summary here, the elevator road that they're talking about was 9.8 million.
that was alternative one. but that what they did was select segment A of alternative 1 to get to that smaller budget.
Got it.
I mean, there, the 77 million for the partial bridge, 11.5 for relocating and elevating the roadway.
So what were, sorry to interrupt, but just to stay on track with this, were there any, because I did look through that, but now I can't remember. Were there any specific solutions for, I guess, section B that we could include here, since there's already been?
I think so.
In the
Because I
study,
think in the study,
In the
which I
study
think
there
we could
were,
add, we
yes.
could, yeah, I just can't remember what they were. Can we add those
Yeah.
to this, so
Yeah,
that we
and-
have, so we can keep
Yeah.
this process
Road
going?
Jim, did you have
renovation.
a comment?
No, I was just thinking about, I think the issue of the town priority is something that should be revisited and maybe the sea level rise committee should take that up at the second time. To ask the town council to update us on what the city several comments, we give it levels of expertise and, you know, I still think that pursuing some coordinate road before you're on the road. It's why we need that road. But if that's, if the town is already going down that road in a real way, we should probably go
and we have a councillor on our committee. I mean, that, we would hope that we would be informed.
This was several years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Right after the study, this was presented to the council at that time. And they were asked to, you know, come to consensus on like next steps and which alternative do you want to pursue? And they selected elevate the roadway and a lot of financial, obviously some of these estimates and try to get an estimate and funding for engineering for elevating. the
And they had
roadway.
to pick
And
a
that's it.
section because they didn't see the whole thing as being feasible because of the budget. Okay, that's helpful, and I'm putting that in the kayak rack, that maybe that's something you guys want to revisit. I just want to ask, does anybody need a break? Do you guys want to take like a few minutes, get a drink of water, anything? I know your brains are working hard.
Do you want to break?
We can push on through if you want. No, I'm fine, but
It's you're the one who has to stand up and break everything.
no, I am fine, but if we want to, this might be a good place to,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. A few minutes, that's fine.
How many bathrooms are there? If we're having a break.
Oh, I'm fine, I just
No, but I will take a break if it's gonna be a break.
Yeah.
Let's take a break. Let's take 3.
Yeah. Because I did take there, I did take one of their recommendations, and that's why we had our last workshop.
Okay. Yeah, well, we can think about that definitely in the project description, for
I
sure.
think part of the reason we're around this committee now is because certainly there's recognition that something has to be done, but also that study has been out there and it's basically just sitting on a shelf,
Right,
which happens often,
yeah,
because it's very tough to get a lot of things
of course.
done, in a community setting. So this is our chance to make influence. And we're supposed to be an advisory committee, but part of it would be good if we know how much push or support for the study and their recommendations exist on the council now.
Yes,
Because there may not be much, but
Right.
there may be a lot.
because it's been a while.
There's no point fighting, that stream, we need to work with it and maybe modify it, but we can't,
Yeah.
why do something head on?
No, that makes sense.
And it's perfectly fine,
I was gonna say, it's a resource.
I've advanced in the last 5 years as well.
Yes,
And funding for that has advanced in the last 5 years as well.
absolutely.
Getting more to the point, so.
Well, and realistically, a lot of times that's the motivation, is that, oh, hey, like, there's all this infrastructure money. Let's dust off this study and really think about which of these alternatives we want to explore. So you certainly have that as a resource. I think that's important.
And one of the things, so I think you guys were part of this conversation, but at our last meeting, we were sort of talking about process of coming up with these ideas and that funding and all that. And so the way I see this working is we're going through these exercises, we're looking at our big ideas, and then we're hoping that we'll meet with Sean O'Rourke, who's from the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank, who is kind of the gatekeeper for a lot of the money
The
that's
action
coming down.
grants, yeah.
And having him say to us, oh yeah, no, that's something we can fund, that's something that we can't fund, and that might help us. Even if we're not prioritizing maybe the ones that we feel are most important, they are the ones that could get funding and we could get started on, you know.
I prefer to work on things that have a chance of winning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, not.
Hopefully they're the
exclusively,
same
but it'd be
thing, but-
great to
Yeah.
have
Yeah, I am all for, you know, like, what is it, luck is preparation meets opportunity, you know, just take these things as far as you can. Don't worry that you don't have $5 million to implement them. That, if you have a strong problem statement and you have a strong project team, you've got community support, those are the things, that's the hard part, you know. Once you have something you can kind of shop around, you can look to, you know, I mean, certainly the infrastructure bank, a lot of the infrastructure money is going to be coming through them, but there's other, you know, federal sources, you know, you can just kind of beat the pavement and see, throw them at grant opportunities and see what sticks, you know, so.
I don't think we have those support for the next topic that we're doing.
That's, yeah, so those are the types of things you kind of need to think about.
It's a state road, why is it out from?
Well,
I think we're gonna have to be the ones who are
Yeah, we have to
encouraging the
push it.
state.
it sounds like, yeah, there's gonna have to be a nudge, and you want whatever solution, even if it's the state that's gonna implement it, I think it's worth it to say, this is what the town would like to see happen here. So,
We have the budget and the copy over there, so the capital improvement plan includes, there is funding, you know, put in for next road resiliency. So, so for design, the engineering, 300,000. The construction, like,
So it's a long range plan.
It's pushed out to the first time the money is spent is 2027, but it's.
yeah, and
Is this a commitment or just?
no,
No.
no,
Maybe rates in that time.
okay. So that's good to know too, so it may be worthwhile to kind of revisit this as a committee, if you had some other recommendations for the town. Okay, so I think what I would suggest is let's kind of take a look at this form. We had a short project description, and I'm trying to remember. Use nature-based solutions to address
If we're talking about Cornet Road.
north, right?
Nature-based solutions
Protect Cornet.
to protect Cornet Road.
From
From.
flooding and erosion, or?
Well, from what we said was the problem.
All searches.
Innovation source.
Yeah.
Sponsor design and I guess high energy is actually this.
Wait 10 years.
Sorry?
Wait 10 years.
Sweet. Yeah, that's the solution, or a solution.
So I'm sorry, what are we protecting it from?
Storm surge.
Well, it's from our problem statement,
From
essentially. I mean, we're repeating
storm
that.
surge,
Storm surge, sea level rise, high energy wave action.
We're trying to protect it from being cut off.
so what are the two things that kind of are the driving factors? I mean, what causes the road to be cut off? It's flooding, right?
Yes,
which is caused both by storm surge,
and destruction of the already present protecting barriers, dunes by energy wave action.
so is erosion the other, flooding and erosion? Are those the two processes we're trying to mitigate, or?
Well, erosion is a result of maybe flooding or surge, but it's not. It's a result of. So I don't know that you have to say that.
Okay,
But we actually have no problem stating it. We're just restate that.
storm surge and flooding. Okay. Okay, so I think that's a good general project description. Obviously, you'll have to drill down to details to come up with more of an action plan.
So, yeah. I was just making a face because, only because I think flooding, well, storm surge causes flooding.
We could replace that with sea level.
Coastal storms cause flooding. So, I mean, you do it from the thing, I mean, flooding is sort of just a thing that's a result.
Right, I would say that like sea level rise is not storm surge, but it certainly
Yeah.
could cause flooding in the future.
Right. So I think in a sense we need to divide this into two, because there's an East Coast problem and a West Coast problem for Corn Neck Road.
Okay,
Okay, and the East Coast problem is certainly initially storm surges and high energy wave impact. The West Coast problem is really much more sea level rise in general, because I don't think anyone actually knows whether a storm surge on the west, well, a storm surge on the outside of the island is going to be fully translated to an equivalent storm surge within the Great Salt Pond, and especially to those inner ponds which are adjacent to Corn Neck Road. So the storm surge aspect is probably going to be less. There's certainly not going to be the same energetic wave action that you will have on the east side. Okay. So I think we need to be looking at each of those separately, and also, of course, you've got the real protection barrier that you use on the east.
Right.
You don't have that effectively on west.
but for this project, would it encompass both east and west?
Well, you would probably do them one at a time.
I think the most critical is the east side, because that's something
Yes.
we've already had experience with, where the storm will surge and high energy waves.
We missed the word in there.
And not only put water on the road, but also fill it up with debris so that it goes impassable.
Oh, okay.
I mean, we had a
Rocks,
flood
sand,
this year.
giant driftwood, I mean, it kind of started 2 years ago.
No.
And you could, after the tide receded, I mean, there's still water on the road.
Sorry,
Millie, she figured it out.
Sorry.
But, in the area of Scottish Beach, I mean, so much, and it wasn't stuff that you would write.
Large.
Wow, okay.
Could you put the project in positive terms rather than a negative term? Would that help? The project is to protect, Corn Neck Road.
Okay.
I think what we said in there is, we said, vulnerable to coastal storms and sea level rise, so could we just say use nature-based solutions to protect Corn Neck Road from coastal storms and sea level rise? Does that encompass all the
Okay.
problem? I mean, I think I agree with you guys that coastal storms are our most immediate, and those do impact our east side more. But I think,
We're called the Sea Level Rise Committee.
This is all just great because this is like literally what we applied for that grant for. To get funding, to get engineering and planning work done, to figure out which nature-based solutions are our best options for protecting Cornet roads.
I like that. So that's high energy waves, storm surge, and then sea level rise as a more long-term, maybe more affecting that. This is kind of more on the west side. This is the main
But
problem.
sea level rise is directly impacting the severity of the storm surges.
Right.
No, climate change is
Oh,
impacting.
sweet.
Sea level rise doesn't, well, sea level rise causes flooding, but it doesn't make. It's the warming that causes the storm.
But as the sea level rises, the storm surges rise with it.
It affects the flood elevations. Yeah.
I think we got it.
Okay.
Well, coastal storms are now, sea level rise is longer term, so we're kind of encompassing both, I think.
I think that's comprehensive.
So
Okay.
that's my bias.
It's good enough.
Okay. Well, so I think that's great. I think that's, for now, that seems like a reasonable, I think if you've defined what types of solutions you're kind of willing to consider. You've identified the issue that you laid out in your problem statement. And from here, you can add detail as you move farther along. So the way that we kind of constructed this, the rest of this worksheet is kind of just taking stock of where you're at with this problem and this potential project. So again, we can tweak this if you think there's more that you want to capture as part of this process to allow you to make those recommendations to the town, that's fine. But I think it is always important to identify what's been done already. We just talked about the engineering study. There's been an alternatives analysis. That at one point the town did make a decision and evaluate the different alternatives. So we don't necessarily, we are not starting from zero here. So I just kind of put different kind of headings here: planning, design, outreach, permitting, implementation, and funding. There's more that could be added here, but what would we list as past work under here? I mean, the first would be,
Past work towards the solution, or past work that's
Yes.
impacted the problem?
no, past work towards the project, which we're saying is to, okay. Allison, was that VHB? Did you say?
Yeah.
What year was that?
17.
What was that?
I think the report was some.
Wow. Yeah, 3 years, 5 years.
2 years PC. Before COVID.
Before.
PC. Pre-COVID.
Oh. Yeah. What is it? December 2017, I think it was January 2018. that would be the finalized thing.
Can any of your organizations, done any kind of studies on Cornet?
I think it's actually called December 2017. Right?
Yeah, December 20.
December 2017.
So I would say past planning work, the municipal resiliency program, we did that workshop. Like this obviously was discussed with that group, and it's within that planning document, the report that they did.
Was it listed as a project in the report from that?
The outcome, they change in both the comp plan and the asset mitigation plan. I don't know if you would count those as actions.
Absolutely. Yeah. Is this section of Cornick Road, is it talked about in the HMP and the comp plan?
Listed in the hazard mitigation plan. And it's.
I believe so. I mean, I can look it up.
So that's important because when you're, you know,
Action, planning study, looking at action and a comp plan,
do the way it was in the comp plan
Yeah.
and his hazard mitigation plan. There's also all the modeling that's been done by CRMC and storm tools and. I mean, that's what's allowed us to identify this problem.
Yep.
The planning board had to go through pre-RI training to better understand, sea level rise. That got me involved.
I would put that under maybe outreach. Maybe,
Education training.
yeah. Do you happen to know, Allison, did VHB do like site level surveys out there as part of their work? They didn't, no elevation surveys. Has the town done any of that?
Not really.
Okay,
I don't think there's just profiles.
and is,
Conceptual.
okay, so yeah,
Or engineer, and then some road profiles, I don't know.
Is this the Cornet planning study?
Yeah.
okay, so that's quite a bit. What about, so is the north section mentioned in the capital improvement program anywhere? Or is it just this
Well,
section
it
A?
doesn't make a distinction.
It doesn't,
No.
okay,
I mean, the planning study, the 2017 planning study was really focused on hard solutions engineering. And it was an engineering group who did the study of it.
And that was, I think it originally, they were responding to the RFP and,
Yeah,
but
sure.
then as the group, the committee that was working with the consultants, I think quickly realized that we also wanted to talk about, when we say alternatives, of nature-based solutions. And so that is put in here, you can see, but it's not quite.
It's a teeny paragraph.
Right.
I mean, it's
But
sort
at
of,
least it did get in here, and the rendering on Scotch Beach, the dunes, there was some work
it was a
put in
gesture.
here.
It was no more.
It was a
than
nod,
gesture.
a
It was,
nod.
I mean, yes,
Okay.
barely even a nod. It's
Okay.
sort of,
I know that some
they sort of said that someone in the community brought it up. And so they sort of put a little drawing in, but it was not in any
It's
sense.
not, it
An
wasn't
engineer,
focused on this
an
study.
engineered thought out
So they did
solution.
mention one thing that I caught, they talked about wave attenuation and about artificial reefs. And I put that on my list for this committee at the very beginning as a suggestion for exploring, and we had a small talk by Scott Cummings on artificial reefs.
oh, because TMC's done some of that work, right, yeah.
So, I mean, that study inspired me to make those recommendations, so.
So it's good, yeah, like the ideas are captured in here, I know they're not
Yeah.
developed, but at least.
So, I mean, the coastal geologists they used, whose name I forget, it was a URI sort of senior, I think he's now emeritus. If you said his name, I probably recognize it. No.
He was already passed.
Yeah, he told them that wave attenuation, artificial reefs would be essentially destroyed by the high energy of wave action here. Now, I'm not sure I believe it. I certainly think we should be looking at it.
It would,
But I think they got an opinion that basically said, this is a waste of time.
that made them dismiss that. alternative.
Yeah.
Did they talk about what scale? I mean,
I haven't looked at this again for a while.
Right.
I've been talking a lot with Brian Oakley because George and I actually work with, and Claire, with Brian on doing profiles and stuff. And He put me in touch with this guy, and he sent me some of the original materials. I think he sent them so good, but this was months ago. My mind doesn't remember this stuff very well.
Yeah.
Well, Scott had those ideas down in Maryland and the Gulf. I guess they've used them, these rate falls for wave attenuation, so it'd be interesting to see how. they
Yeah,
do that.
and my understanding is there are some that have actually withstood hurricane forces in some places.
They're big, but yeah, I mean, it's like you can design something.
Yeah, well, yeah, obviously,
The
scale
challenge
and cost, all of
Right.
that's right, but I think it's something we should look at.
Okay.
Seriously.
So right now, none of us, and correct me if I'm wrong, feel confident in making strong recommendations as what to do about Hornet, but what we are doing is collecting and connecting information from experts. So how is that going to be reflected?
So I think this all is kind of this past work. So we are just taking stock of what's been done. It sounds like we have some conceptual plans. What about like permitting conversations? Have the town kind of had any preliminary discussions with CRMC? Did they participate in any of those processes?
Yeah, I was wondering, I know that Edward version had a small group on the Scotch Beach, to talk about the
Repassing the road.
right, the half
Yeah.
and the cave, so that it wasn't a direct shot.
Yeah.
Brian was part of that group.
And, yeah, I was trying to remember in what circumstance that happened.
I wasn't aware that there was actually a meeting on.
Yeah, I was
there
out
about
there,
it.
sorry.
Yeah, I didn't attend it. Well, it's probably, it was in the study, so I must have been following that, but I mean, we recently talked about that as a potential project for a grant, but we had passed on that recently.
I think, I mean, if it was based on the sort of thing that showed up in the study, which was my impression, I think it's a few wasted effort and time. I mean, I disagree with you, Sosha, in that I don't think, I think there are people on the committee who would strongly push for certain solutions. And, you know, dune rebuilding, I think, would be the primary one. You know, the beach house is a major site of vulnerability. It's probably the worst one of any along that east coast. And you know, the storm we had, I don't know, a month or so ago, came straight through onto the road. It didn't. The flood remained on the road for a substantial amount of time because it doesn't drain well from there. And clearly that is a huge vulnerability that has, at least a focus for solutions. And one obvious solution would be move the damn beach house and let the dune rebuild. I think almost anyone who thinks about the dune as a protected structure or whatever would say that we should have a continuous dune all along Cornet Road.
Right.
And if there are any ways for vehicles to get through, they need to be buffered out.
Okay. So
You're here.
But there's not a consensus on that.
there's not a consensus on
Well,
that.
so what is, I'm interested what the not a consensus means, because I know that people who object to closing off roads to the beach, but I don't think anyone would disagree that having a continuous dune is the best protection for Cornet Road.
Is that,
Is that a reasonable?
I just remember when we had meetings in the past about that break in the dune of the southern end, that's for emergency access, for emergency vehicles to access the beach if somebody needs emergency help. So that was something that was said, we need to keep that open. That's what I've heard when attending meetings, when discussing this.
Oh, we've all heard that, and I think that is something that is a real issue, so we have to figure out a solution
Yes.
which allows access to be there, but maybe not in that way, or certainly not in the size of the pavilion, but maybe we have two smaller openings, and actually I've seen the town, the highway department fill them in when they expect us.
They were required to by the CRC.
So-
Yeah.
That rings a bell, yeah.
So there's a way of
Sure.
figuring that out, but that's exactly one of the great cases of something that we can maybe help the
Okay,
town council figure out with some other solutions.
Make
Because it is,
recommendations.
because it is clearly important and it's kind of black and white. We gotta have access, but we also know that dunes, continuous dunes is the single best way. And I don't even think there's anything close to as important as dune protection, to protect the road.
so let me ask this, oh, sorry, go ahead, Kim.
I was gonna say, right now, there are 4 ways, 3.5 ways to access vehicle access. One, they fill it in, now it's open, and it's signed by a beach. There's 2 on either side of the beach. And then the fourth one is Scotch.
And then there's Manchester.
And then, yeah, I'm talking about the second. Sorry, Claire. But the thing also is the walk, there are more walkways than there used to be, and those are getting blown out. And now there's 3 between the town beach and Scotch Beach. 3 major walkways where people walk.
Across the park there.
Right, but now there are, because of the nature of the footprint and the view, you have to walk it out if you go on it. The east side of the dune, it's really a urban track, and then it follows into the little path that comes out to the road.
And that's the problem.
And it's, that tunneling is scouring those areas, and water is going to be flowing through there more. So we should be considering filling those in and having mobile walkways that go over the dune and then get rolled up, like we say, roll up your beach at the end of the winter, summer. But I think we have too many
Access points.
pedestrian access points. The one in the corner, south corner of the town beach, that never even used to be there, then it was a little path over the dune, and now it's one of those lots of stuff.
So if we're still thinking just of this north section,
Yeah.
do we feel, and not knowing what the alternatives are that exist in this report, do we feel like this report represents the universe of alternatives or solutions that you would want to see discussed? And I heard earlier that there was not really that strong of a mention of nature-based solutions. So I'm just trying to get at, if we're thinking about next steps, like what is the point we're starting from? Do we need to revisit this report and see what in there is worth pursuing as a potential?
I think
Project?
regarding nature-based solutions, no.
Okay.
I don't think they make any.
They don't go into enough detail.
They don't.
But it's mentioned at least.
Okay.
Dune restoration is one of them.
Okay,
It's in here, but it's not
okay.
at the level of needing.
So we need more
detail and
information
apply
from
some
some
other.
other source.
I want to add, so past work, maybe also, should we add Claire, the pre-proposal that was submitted a grant application for the nature-based solutions for this?
Oh, what's
Yeah,
that?
I mean, I kind of feel like validating the work that we put into putting that free proposal in, I'm wishing, that we'd involve more people in that, because, we just applied for an equip to,
Oh, great.
we put a free proposal in to get funding to do this sort of planning and, planning work to figure out what nature-based solutions are available to us to protect Cornet Road. And that's everything from, as you were saying, the dunes to wave attenuation to marsh rebuilding on the other side, it's pretty comprehensive.
Did you leave it open in the pre-proposal that we don't really know what all the options are? We just need
So
to
they
do
have
work
you
to.
apply in, you probably know this, but you can apply as, forgetting what all the categories are now, but you can apply as, we don't really know
Conceptual
yet,
planning for-
conceptual, we need
yeah.
help planning to, we're ready to build.
Right,
And we applied in the category of, we don't really know yet, so we're applying for funding to find out what it is.
Okay.
They have a pipeline program where you can apply at different stages depending on
It's
where you
great.
are.
We just did that, and we had 2 projects that were funded for conceptual planning. We identified them as pipeline, and they got right through the process. We're already
Wow.
doing our full proposal, so that's great. So that's like, I mean, so you already have, like, this past work applies to planning design. There's been some preliminary stuff done. Outreach, it sounds like there's been some work on site, like discussions that have taken place. You know, it's been discussed in the MRP workshop. Permitting, it sounds like maybe there, I don't know to the degree to which.
I think the consultants reached out to permitting agencies during this process,
Yeah.
but nothing.
Right, and then, obviously not implementation, but funding, you have something in the works to maybe fund some preliminary planning
Right.
and conceptual. I would say you're at like the conceptual design phase, right?
And what about the fact that some of the direction is now being used to protect people? Yeah, really. Where did all that sand come from that was dumped on the dunes not too long ago?
Oh, that came out of the, not dredging, that came from, the town beach. Because it's blowing in that corner, it's being blown out. That path, and you know how it goes out of the southeast corner there? It's great to have it put on the hill, but the reason we have it is, you know. Okay.
So yeah, are there any other things that you think should be captured in this,
In any of those.
in the past work? Or any other subcategories that you feel aren't represented here?
So we still don't know what project we want specifically, we're still exploring.
Well, I think it sounds like, I think nature-based solutions to protect the road is kind of a good start.
Right.
I think they, yeah, so we're going to focus on that since we've done a transportation focus.
Right,
I know that all of us are interested in dunes, but I haven't, we
Right.
haven't reached consensus yet
Right.
as to how to do that.
so for me, and Allison chime in here, you know, it's helpful when I think of like restoration projects, which this isn't necessarily, but, you know, it's kind of,
Might be on the other side.
Right.
On the west side.
so when I, you know, when I've been involved in project management, it's like you kind of you start with a problem, you have a, you know, a concept of something that you're trying to solve, and then the first step is this conceptual design. So it's really, and you do need help at this stage usually, because it helps to get things on a plan. That's taking stock of what the existing conditions are. So getting things like an elevation survey, getting it on a plan, identifying areas where the erosion is severe, identifying areas that flood. So that, you know, and you can get some of this from Storm Tools. We are lucky that Storm Tools is pretty high resolution, but it's really kind of drilling down and getting a very site-specific assessment. So it's helpful to kind of start with existing conditions. I personally feel that site visits, like the one you mentioned, are invaluable. So getting people interested in the project out to the site and walking around so that you're all looking at the same thing. Sometimes it helps to have that base plan in your hands when you're doing that. So that you're saying, oh yeah, this is area number 1. This is really where the biggest problem is.
We can wait, I guess.
Is this a site visit just for the community, or is it about including?
I think you can have site visits at various stages, but I think it helps to start before you try to come up with your conceptual plan to generate ideas on site. So like, and then I just, you know, I personally feel like there's no substitute for that, because it's when you're in a conference room, it's like all in the abstract, right? And so that's helpful. I would assume at that point, like if you got this funding, what you could do is kind of bring on a consultant who could help you map things out, help with the survey work, help with the biological assessments of the habitats. And then that's like the basis for what you're talking about. So you can start to visualize what needs to go into the plan. And then they help you come up with a conceptual plan. So it's kind of like baseline condition, and then here's what we're proposing to do. And it starts very general. It's like, okay, in this area over here, we're thinking dune restoration. In this area over here, we're gonna plant native shrubs to address the erosion, or in this area over here, we're gonna make sure that this is conserved for marsh migration or something like that. Or we may want to do some kind of, more engineered solution. We're going to install core logs here and plant with dune grasses. They can kind of generally represent those things on a plan, and then that's like a straw man that you can. At that point, that's a good thing to use for your outreach. So if you're going to bring more people to the table, you can say, okay, here we've got this conceptual plan. What do you think? And people may have different ideas about how to change it. And then, so that's not going to be sufficient for permitting or construction, but it's a useful tool to kind of, get feedback, refine, make sure everybody's on the same page about what you want to do. And then the next step is really what we call kind of like 60% design. So that's when you get very like precise elevations, you have cross sections of anything that's constructed. That's something you can submit for permitting. So that's something that CRMC could look at and review. And then CRMC would likely give you feedback on that 60% design plan. They may ask for changes. They may ask, for you to add a buffer or, increase your amount of planting. And then those changes get incorporated into that 60% design plan. And then you have your final plan. And that's what gets circulated when you hire somebody to construct your project. So that would be something, and again, a consultant can help you with all of this. They could put together, if you're going to put it out to bid, they could, help you with a bid package and that kind of thing.
And Teresa Cream, when she spoke to us, she mentioned that her shoreline adaptation plan, which she calls her kitchen sink list, will provide engineers with proposals up to 60% design.
Oh, so that might be, I'm not sure what she's referring to, but it might be a project that I worked with her on. So we did this, like we had a project that helped towns come up with these 60% design plans. So got them to that point in the process. That project is actually just wrapping up now. But I think there will be more money to do that. So the infrastructure bank, we kind of like have phase 2 of that project. It was the CRMC project. It was kind of my project. So when I left CRMC, it ended. And then we're working with the infrastructure bank to do kind of phase 2. So
Is that what they're like an upcoming meeting about the new municipal design program?
I don't know.
And like we were in the program last year, but I think I was wondering if that's related to that.
that the basic idea is that it would complement. So we've got some funding to kind of beef up the nature-based component of the municipal resilience program. So
And they could do planning work. What my understanding was the program would change a little bit and they have some funding that can help get projects ready for implementation. In
Yes.
the next cycle, so
yeah.
that's hopefully where we can.
Yeah, we've been talking to them about that because, their whole thing is action grants. They want like shovel-ready projects, but it's like, well, it takes a lot of funding to get to that point. So yeah, and I don't know what exactly that's going to look like. That is all just kind of starting now, but they've even talked about like having kind of engineers on retainer who can provide engineering services. So maybe it's a state-held, position that can kind of be deployed for other, yeah. Sure.
So the next step is a specific site-specific plan that shows exactly where the problems are before we develop a plan. And then possibly use the money that uses this plan to help create that plan. And then we go and take a conceptual plan. We create a conceptual plan and we take that to the public. And then we go to engineering.
Yeah, I mean, you can do outreach at kind of any point in the process. And again, it's up to you when you want to bring people into the process, whenever you want their input. But I think, yes, I think a conceptual plan is like a good point to get input, because you're not presenting a final design. You haven't spent a whole lot of money refining your design. You've just put some ideas on a plan, and that's people's chance to kind of like, but it gives people something to point to say, why are you doing this here? What about this area over here? You can get feedback that way.
And who creates, I mean, we create the concept, but who creates the physical map?
So when we've done that the project that Teresa spoke about, we basically, we kind of hired one engineering or consulting firm, and they worked with a bunch of we did 9 projects in 9 different municipalities. So usually it's like an environmental consultant could do that for you. You may be able, depending on the project, you might be able to use like a landscape architect. Some of them have engineering expertise, but you would probably want a registered professional engineer, because eventually you want them, you know, it's easiest if you have the same firm doing all the phases, and once they get to final design, they're gonna have to stamp that plan if it's gonna be used for permitting. So it would be, you know, a company like VHB or GZA or Fuss and O'Neill, or there's a lot of them in Rhode Island.
And that's just for the site-specific plan, first phase of the plan.
But
Do
they
some of these specialize in nature-based solutions? We clearly PhD do not.
well,
Or maybe they do now.
we're trying, I mean, that is like the shift that we're trying to push with the professional design community. I think they do more than they used to. I mean, engineers like to engineer, right? So they tend to, you know, I think sometimes things can get over-designed. However, and that's because they have to stamp it. They have to know that what they design is going to stand up to whatever, you know, forces it's going to be exposed to. What I will say is they will listen to your feedback. So if you say, like, you know, if nature-based solutions are what's really important to us, then, you know, they will listen to that and incorporate it. I think there are some companies that tend to be better than others in that arena, and we could talk to you about some of the folks we worked with recently.
Scott mentioned a group called Sunco Eco.
Yes, they're great.
Okay.
And they're design build. So they design and they do the
So
implementation.
they would be all the way through. essentially.
Yes, and they actually acquired a company called Netco, which does like the coconut fiber logs that are like used for erosion control. He was was a guy based up in Massachusetts, and he's very knowledgeable about that stuff, and now he's part of Sumco. So if you're interested, I mean, like, you know, I could give you examples of projects that have been done and plans that some of these companies have created for us. And this is just my suggestion. That's how, when I think about a project like this, those are the steps.
But since we are a consultant, I would sort of imagine that our job ends after that first.
Conceptual.
specific-
Yeah.
So that once the town makes up its mind what it wants to do, that they get the engineer perhaps.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, that makes sense. I think a conceptual plan will be a very helpful tool for the committee to kind of discuss amongst yourselves, and then for public outreach. I would say that's a solid goal for you all to
I
make.
have no idea.
Well, it's not, I mean, it's not obvious unless you've kind of been through the process. It's kind of, it's a lot of steps, but.
In the grant that you guys wrote, how far would that fund, how far would it take you into the process?
So we had to say what we wanted as an outcome of the grant, and what we said was we wanted to have an environmental consultant hired who was developing a plan or plans for Hornet Grove, using nature-based solutions, because that was what NICLIP is willing to fund, is nature-based solutions. So we would have probably that conceptual plan at the end of this grant. That's what that grant would fund. Is that
And if we get funding, we would then develop, you know, an RFP, and we could get more specific, list, you know, we want site-specific assessment, or we can list a lot of the things we just talked about,
Yeah,
and give more. Still, the pre-proposal is pretty general, so we will then develop exactly what the scope of work is as the next step.
yeah.
So the operation of the grant would be specifically a town responsibility.
Yes.
As opposed to.
Oh, yeah, no, it's not ours.
Yeah. Do we have it
I think that's what we've been tasked with.
into the process of the consultant? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just so the shoreline adaptation project is kind of a good analogy, example of this kind of process. And what we did is we had a certain amount of money and we said, we're going to do as many projects as we can. So we put out a request for proposals from firms that said, you know, we wound up choosing 9 sites, and we said, here are the 9 sites, and here is the general problem at each site, and we want to, you know, come up with conceptual plans for each of these. And we got a range. I mean, and the lowest bid, the company we wound up working with, it meant that, and because we're the state, we had to go with the lowest bid, but they were great. And thank goodness. And we had money left over that we said, okay, you 2 towns, you seem like you're ready to go. Do you want to take this to final design? And we were able to kind of like revise our work plan, and NIFWF was all about it because they were like, oh yeah, we want to see these projects built. And so we just kind of we modified the contract and were able to keep that same consultant on to take us to the next step. So it's kind of like, you know, you can apply for the money and then you're not really sure what you're going to get for responses, but we got a great response when we did the shoreline adaptation project. I think we got like, I want to say 8 proposals. So, you know, if the town's amenable to this committee having input into reviewing those, I mean, I don't know what your kind of purchasing procedure is, but, you know, you'll be able to tell and be very specific in what you ask for. Like, please demonstrate that you have experience with nature-based solutions. And by this, at this point, most of the bigger firms should have that experience.
I really like this information, because seeing in terms of where we are and that point, that we are still at the stage of collecting ideas,
Right.
right?
Yes, like, so there's probably some work that has to happen. I think you could, if you get this grant and you can hire a consultant, they could, you know, their first step is going to be to go out and do like a survey, map, you know, the vegetation and the road and everything, get elevations, so you'll have an existing conditions plan. And then I think somewhere in here maybe is where you kind of as a group maybe go out and do a site visit to talk about ideas.
That's very encouraging.
Yes, because you guys have something, yeah.
There's a 4 o'clock meeting, so, and I know that's set up, I think, so it's one thing right
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think you know, I do think the positives here are that so much work has already been done. So you've had some real discussions. You've come up with a really good problem statement. And again, when you're looking to hire a firm, that's going to be very important to communicate what your objectives are for the project. And then I think this is totally doable for this committee, is to, you know, kind of get a lay of the land and then maybe gather some more information and have somebody help you put it into a plan.
Well, and I'm just thinking maybe a direct outcome of all this is, because we're an advisory committee, having Judy or someone go to the next town council meeting and explain to them that, you know, this or not only do you have other projects that you think are also important, but these are, I think we should be doing more to communicate what we're identifying as the problems to the community and the town council. Don't really feel like we've done much of that yet, because we haven't known what the problems are yet.
Yeah, I sort of think that to have a committee meeting where we, you know, given what we know now, can redefine however many it is, and, you know, to be lumbered with 5 is not a good idea, because there may be 6, there may be 3, I mean, whatever. And, you know, just decide what's gonna be the most likely to actually be good.
Because I'm not gonna have it, this will be the outcome, but we might have the town have to say, there's no way we're ever doing due restoration. Like, we're just advising, so we probably should involve them sooner rather than later.
We could provide recommendations, and these are the things we're thinking about for next steps, and just see what the feedback is, if it's supportive, or if they provide some information or concern on that, might direct you in a different way.
Does the town council know about the NIPA proposal?
I'm not sure if it's been, I haven't been on the agenda.
Okay, I was gonna say, like, you've got this great problem statement. I mean, that would be a great thing to present to them, along with, like, we're thinking about next steps and we've applied for this
You
money.
told Mary, yeah, right, it's the town manager.
Yeah.
I personally, I think that is Spencer, he is the town council member on this committee.
Right, right.
So it seems to me we have to nudge him and ask him to periodically bring the council up to date.
We should know the invitation for a proposal, I think it was, they said, like, a month out.
Yeah.
So it's pretty quick, like, so.
Yeah.
We would,
At that point, you kind of need their buy-in.
yeah. Yeah, we would probably need some more,
Great. Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, in this town, especially, they.
Well, I think you all should feel really good about yourselves, and today, I think you've made so much progress. And do you feel fairly confident that you could do this again for another project? Do you have a good enough handle on the process? I mean, again, we could come back out and help you, but,
I think we would benefit from.
okay, all right.
Yeah, no, I having a facilitator, having you do this makes all the difference.
Okay, well,
To my mind.
Glad you found it worthwhile. And again, I'd like just give yourselves a round of applause. You did a great job with that problem statement. And I will, again, I'm gonna bring all this home and I can take pictures for you,
Okay.
Allison, and write up notes, make sure nothing gets lost. So thank you so much for having me.
You're good at it.
Oh,
Yes,
thank you.
yes.
That's not a word. Well, different times you want to-
It's hard. The process stuff, I think, you know, you've got a group of extremely intelligent people, but it doesn't mean that the process is obvious, right? So I think it does help to have a little bit of a roadmap.
Well, and there's so many things that are important, it's really
It
hard
can get, it's easy to get off track for sure.
So I'll let you.
You guys did great.
Ladies, I'll let you. Thank you very much. I'll wait for you. Like VW.
Okay,
Whenever you're ready.
wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, sir.